Welcome to the Intelligent Business Show, a podcast from Aberdeen discussing the latest trends to keep you and your business at the top of your class. And now, here's your host, Aberdeen's CMO in residence, Matthew Grant.
Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Intelligent Business Show. I'm your host, Matt Grant, CMO in residence here at Aberdeen. Today, we're talking to Michael Locke, Senior Vice President of Research at Aberdeen. Mike has been with Aberdeen for nearly 10 years and oversees our research practice. Mike's own research focuses on business intelligence and analytics, which is what we'll be talking with him about today. All right, Mike, so thanks for joining us on the show today, of course. Before we get too deep into this stuff, I want to make sure that we have working definitions of the terms we're using for our listeners. And specifically, since it's part of what your research covers here at Aberdeen, what really is the difference between business intelligence and analytics?
Yeah, this is a conversation that I find myself having a lot. Business intelligence as a concept, the way that I think of it, and there are multiple definitions out there. If you ask 10 analysts, you might get 10 different answers. But essentially, I think of business intelligence as sort of a static entity, almost like military intelligence, where you have an idea of troop movements and enemy technology, things like that. Not to make a military analogy, but I just did nonetheless. Business intelligence would be understanding using data what's happening in the business. So getting visibility into key metrics as they're changing, profitability, employee productivity, things like that. And displaying that intelligence in a way that is consumable and easy to use, easy to consume for people in the business. Analytics to me implies a level of activity. So you are, regardless of what type of user you're talking about, there are people that are out there exploring data. They're transforming the data. They're putting it into models to help them understand the business. They're applying some form of activity to it. They're analyzing it. They're performing analytics. So there's sort of different sides of the same coin, I suppose. You hear a lot more about the term analytics these days than you do about the term business intelligence. I'm not entirely sure why, but I think it has to do with that level of activity that analytics implies.
Okay. And the other part, just from a clarification standpoint, business intelligence is focusing on business performance broadly. It's different from like what you talk about here at Aberdeen, market intelligence or market research. It's really specific, like the things you had mentioned, business profitability, employee performance, and that kind of stuff. Is that valuable as a distinction?
It certainly could be. I mean, primarily when you're talking about the traditional definition of business intelligence and the traditional consumers of that insight, you're talking about executives that are making decisions about the business based on performance. But I think, especially when you bring the concept of analytics into it, you could be analyzing and understanding multiple different areas of the business that might not necessarily have to do with traditional line item financial metrics like profitability or revenue growth or things like that. You could be looking at aspects of operational efficiency or a live production environment or whatever it might be, just aspects of the business, gaining visibility into those for a better understanding, for improvement, for a variety of different reasons. But typically, yes, it's about understanding performance and improving that.
All right. And so with business intelligence, it's been around for a while in some form or another, but prior to this conversation, you had described a kind of evolution of it from where it started to where we are today and kind of where it's heading. So I was wondering if you could walk us through that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's going to follow largely with the evolution of the technology and that's available to us. But if you go back, I don't know when you would pinpoint the beginning of the world of business intelligence. But essentially, at the beginning, you have people that are professionals in dealing with data. You've got IT professionals, database administrators, those whose job it is to handle and manage data to some aspect, to some degree. So they're the ones that are creating things like reports and dashboards, which have been around for decades. The next wave of analytics was really about, or the next wave of BI was really about improving the usability of the tools to a broader audience and making improving accessibility of these reports and dashboards to the point where you can have people, um, you know, defining their own views of the data and asking questions of the data, getting a little bit more active with that data. Where we're headed towards now, and there probably aren't that many companies out there that would consider themselves in this sort of frontline wave of analytics, but it's really about spreading the analytical activity into the hands of a much broader audience of users. So people whose job doesn't necessarily have anything to do with data whatsoever, but they understand the business, they understand finance, or they understand sales, they understand manufacturing operations, or whatever it might be. Having access to more data than they've ever had access to before, and more tools to do something with that data than they've ever had before. So it's about empowering a broader set of users with those capabilities, and giving them access to more raw materials to create insight.
So is it accurate to say that the first stage, in a sense, meant that you had to have very technical ability with specialized languages that allowed you to do database queries and that kind of thing? The next stage was at least putting a interface layer on there that allowed people to do things probably more efficiently and more quickly, but it was still fairly technical. And then the trend now is to actually make it as you said, as accessible and usable as possible to people who don't have any kind of necessarily baked in technical expertise with regards to data analytics.
Yeah, no, well, definitely. And it's worth mentioning at this point that, you'll come across companies that are still in the Stone Age when it comes to their data environments. A lot of them haven't even moved to digital, electronic based movement of documents, so these stages still exist in multiple levels right now, but in essence, yes.
So if we follow this arc where we started, it's highly technical. People are kind of far away from the business, close to the technical aspects of data manipulation and warehousing and things like that. And as we get closer to people who are very close to the business, but fairly far away from that technical expertise, my guess is that you've had to bake that technical expertise in a way into the technology. You've had to enable it technologically. So I was wondering, what are the technologies that are really driving this move towards, I guess we can call it embedded analytics, that's really for the typical business user side of things?
So there's a couple of different things going on here. There's the digitization of activities in our lives that people are getting more and more accustomed to. And in a business environment, there are more applications available than ever before to automate and digitize the way people do their jobs. Along with that comes more data available than ever before to describe what's going on in the business. So you've got an application that is very, very specific to a particular corner of the company, and it's generating data that is in some cases inherent to that functionality. You've got machine generated sensor data, the IoT. You've got unstructured text-based data, social media, blogs, things like that. You've got third-party external data, government weather data, whatever it might be. There's more data, more types of data that are available. So these things are many of the, again, they're both drivers and sort of reasons why this is happening. But this is sort of driving this third wave, which is, how do we get analytics into the hands of users that can actually become more active with the data? Well, a big way that this is going to happen, at least I believe, it's certainly already happening now, and I think this is going to explode over the next several years in business cycles, if you will, which is delivering analytics in context. So rather than a user needing the specific analytical expertise and sophistication to run database queries and do things like that, they're able to apply their domain-specific business knowledge in an application where analytics is delivered to them in context, embedded. This is a term that's used a lot these days, embedded analytics. I've done a lot of research on embedded analytics, but the capabilities are delivered within the context of the application that someone is using on an everyday basis.
Could you give an example of how that happens?
Sure. So again, think about all the different business functions that have an application that serves their daily lives.
Right.
So in a marketing department, they're opening up their CRM system to understand what their customers are doing, how they're thinking and acting, what they've purchased. So they're using analytics embedded within CRM to understand customer behavior, understand customer demographics, sales performance. Right. So understanding sales rep performance, delivering dashboards embedded within a CRM application, or understanding employee performance with analytics embedded within a human capital management application or something along those lines. So there's a whole host of different examples of how that might work, but it's typically the most common applications today: ERP, CRM, marketing automation, financial applications, things like that. And as you pointed out, the capabilities themselves, the tools, the technical aspects are delivered, are baked within that solution, and they're delivered within a context of the way that someone works anyway throughout their daily lives.
Right. So I'm wondering, if you could talk about some of the sort of underlying technologies that enable this. Like, so for example, if you're going to be doing in the old way, if you wanted to query a database, you had to know SQL or something like that and create a SQL query. And now I imagine it's possible to do searches in a way that's more natural. So is that, I'm just curious, is that one way that this works? You make it simpler to ask questions of the data without having to know some special language.
What I just described with the first wave of embedded analytics was more about just consumption only.
Right.
So there's a visualization that is available within the context of that application that's helpful. As people try to start to ask questions about what's going on, why is this happening, that's where the new wave of some more cutting edge technologies are gonna factor in fairly heavily. Mm-hmm. So you hear about AI all the time. What are the aspects of business intelligence that would be considered under the umbrella of AI? There are several of them. You alluded to natural language. Well, NLP, NLG, so natural language processing, natural language generation, are ways of basically augmenting the way that a person views their own business with technology to help support that. So taking the natural language, the way that someone thinks and would ask questions almost conversationally of their business, translating that into query language. Yeah. So what were the Northeast region sales for Q3 and Q4? That with natural language processing could be translated into query language and actually go out and retrieve that data from a traditional data warehouse environment or whatever it might be, yep, without requiring any of that technical sophistication from the user. Right. Natural language generation, similar concept, where you've sort of on the other end of the question, as the answers are coming back in data form, you have computer generated language that helps people make sense of what's going on with the data.
Right.
So there are, not necessarily binary ones and zeros coming back, but there's data retrieval, and it's producing a pile of stuff, yeah, that would be difficult for any person to sort of sift through and understand why it matters. And natural language generation is designed to help people understand the narrative of what's going on with the data.
Right.
I'm giving them ideas as to why this might be happening by applying natural language to the data to tell people what could be happening.
Right. And I know it's funny, I always think of this specialized application of that is they've actually used natural language generation to write sports stories, for example. Since you can tell the story like of a baseball game
Absolutely.
through the stats,
Yeah.
you can actually, and they have done already, produce news stories based solely on the data.
Exactly. You look at a box score from a baseball game, and you can, 6 innings pitched and 12 strikeouts and whatever it might be.
Right. They rallied in the fifth because suddenly they had 4 hits when they hadn't had any and stuff like that. You can teach a machine to say those
and
things.
make it sound conversational.
Right, exactly.
Absolutely.
So then speaking of machines, then I guess we come into this machine learning, which is kind of a subset of AI, but I think in some ways is more AI than what people think of as AI. Is that also playing a role where you're actually you're relying, not only are you asking these questions, but you're actually relying on the underlying technology to do work on the data to generate whatever the results are. The thing to remember is even with this natural language processing and you're posing search questions in your natural language, it's not like you're asking the machine to go pull a book off a shelf. The system actually has to look at the data and do work on it that in some levels is intelligent. It's not just following a rote. You're not just pushing, essentially, it's not just pushing a button, having some recipe run. And that's where, I guess what the real question here is this where machine learning is a real reality as what's kind of going on behind the curtain for these embedded analytics tools?
When you think about machine learning, if I were to grotesquely oversimplify its impact, I think personally that the opportunity for machine learning is to help people not just get answers that they seek, but really to help them ask better questions of the business in the first place. And that's highly oversimplified. But machine learning is all about taking historical data, understanding and recognizing the patterns in that data, and producing suggestions or predictions on how future behavior might look, but also suggestions on how you might look at the data. So the machine learning can be applied in a whole variety of different ways. Machine learning can be used in from a more data facing perspective in helping show people these are the data sources that are most commonly accessed. These are the ones that are typically most descriptive of the questions that you're asking. These are the ways that data is typically transformed or most effectively transformed. I have been in the past, all the way out to sort of the front end of, we've got 10 years worth of historical data that shows us all of the different factors that play into the profitability of the business. As we've added more data sources, we're adding more data that can help describe why things might be happening with the business. So it can provide predictions on levers that you might pull as a manager to help improve profitability, things that you might not have ever actually thought of before. The finding correlations in different data, different types of data across different types of data sources and applications is really the sort of the new frontier, if you will, for what you might have considered advanced analytics or predictive analytics or machine learning and AI. There are a lot of the different terms for it, and there are a lot of different ways to think about how it works. But essentially, the way that I like to think of it is that you're developing the machines, the computers are enabling you to better understand your business in ways that you never would have thought of without that support in the first place.
Right. So I have one final question, and this is even more future looking, but I think it kind of follows from some of the stuff that you're talking about. And that is, again, we saw this arc from having specialized people and technologies to getting this closer and closer to the kind of line level decision makers, and even, below the high level business decision makers you were talking about in terms of this kind of second wave. I guess my question is, as processes become more and more digitized and more automated, is it possible that you would then, like on some level, all the business intelligence technologies you're talking about have an output. That output right now is taken as an input by a human to make a decision. But are you seeing any movement to even eliminate within certain processes that human decision maker? Because since these algorithms, there's an output here that could be an input for some other system also powered by machine learning or whatever. So I know that's kind of a Skynet,
Yeah.
kind of trajectory, but it seems like a logical next step or kind of path. The human part is almost then just starts to feel like guessing or gut feel when the machine part is actually driven by, I don't know, like maybe just more of an algorithmic or mathematical predictive certainty. But maybe I'm just being too, human machine paranoid about it.
No, well, so I mean, I think there are examples of both that are happening right now. Where when I say both, I mean, um, you know, environments that produce data that require decisions to be made to ensure productivity. Think about an IoT environment, Internet of Things, a
Yep.
manufacturing and production environment. There are decisions that can be made by machines in a much more productive way where you would want them to be made by machines theoretically, right?
Right.
So you like, for example, you have a live production environment that is producing data on the order of terabytes, as things are as machines are fabricating parts for an assembly line, for example, and you've got a machine that is displaying that is starting to show signs of wear, or it's out of spec and it's producing products that are inferior. There are decisions that can, like a human might look at that data and decide we're going to shut that machine down. It's called predictive maintenance, where
Right.
I'm predicting that this machine is going to fail. We're going to shut it down and put a different one into the production environment to avoid downtime.
Yep.
So that's an example of where maybe you would want the machine to go ahead and make that decision for you.
Exactly. You could have the machine actually call the technician or the support people, even schedule a call based on what it's seeing within the machine without having to alert a dispatcher to
Right.
then look at their team and assign someone to go. Like it becomes, I guess on this level, it seems to the extent that you can look at even certain kinds of ecosystems as definable systems.
Right.
The machine's broken, the service tech has to come and fix it or something like that.
Right.
That's a system which itself then can, as long as you can have defined inputs into it that you trust, that is something that can be automated, and you could have the machine make the decision for you
Right.
in a way that you would everyone would want that to happen.
Right. And there are other environments where you wouldn't necessarily want that to happen. And
Right.
and so that you perhaps you've heard of the term predictive analytics before.
Yeah.
Perhaps you've heard of the term prescriptive analytics, and essentially what that is it's a machine generated prescribed course of action.
Yeah.
So you've got the data that it's been gathering. It's been modeled in a way that is beneficial for understanding how the business is going to perform, and you've got the machine that is recommending a course of action based on the data that is at hand. At the end of the day, though, most of those environments, it's still going to come down to a human making the decision.
Right.
You've got you're a decision maker. You've got 20 years of experience in that particular industry. You've got data telling you one thing. You've got your experience telling you another thing. There's the judgment call to be made.
Right.
And I think in those cases, the human judgment is going to remain a critical element for hopefully
Yeah.
indefinitely.
Right. Though it's interesting. I mean, you say that because it was actually reminding me of stuff that I've heard about, for example, in call center and customer support environments, where I guess this prescriptive analytics expresses itself as next best action recommendations.
Right. Yep.
So you have a human. There has to be a human interface, customer and the customer support person. but the customer support person is enhanced by data capabilities that are saying, oh, here's this person, here's their buying history, here's what's happened with all these people that have reported this issue. This is the thing, the next best thing that you should do. So it becomes prescriptive in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that in a best case scenario, these types of capabilities are designed to basically give people a bionic brain to a certain extent.
Yeah.
They still have the decision-making capabilities, but they have access to more supporting evidence than they've ever had before, and they can make the decision based on all of that combined.
Yeah. It's like intelligence augmentation kind of technology.
Exactly.
So, all right. Well, very fascinating stuff, Mike, and thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
And thanks to everyone for listening with us today. Next week, I'll be sitting down with Mike O'Toole from PJA Marketing and Advertising. Mike is the president of PJA, and we've partnered with them on several B2B buyer surveys over the last few years. In this episode, we'll be talking about the results of our 2018 survey. I really hope you all tune in. You're not going to want to miss it. Thanks, and see you next week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Intelligent Business Show. You can find this show on iTunes and Spotify, as well as on YouTube. And be sure to follow us on Twitter at Aberdeen_show. And if you want to know what's going on in your market space, be sure to check out Aberdeen.com.